we are seeing carriers moving faster in a way that we didn't see the industry moving as fast with any of the previous potential shifts like IoT, etc. And I think there's one main reason why the industry is moving significantly faster, which is for the first time, there's tangible business benefit, right? So we were talking about IoT, ecosystems, etc. Right? Like those were all things which are very valid theoretically. I think what we're seeing with kind of digital risk processing technologies and using Gen AI is today there are carriers that are being able to return a quote to the broker within 2-3 hours of receiving the submission, right? Today, we're seeing some of our clients that have multiplied by 2 the productivity of their underwriters. When you see the actual business impact, it's really difficult to stay on the sideline and say, well, yeah, I get it. I could double the productivity of my team. I'm not sure I want to. Hi, this is Juan de Castro, COO at Cytora, and this is the future of insurance.
Juan, I'm very excited to sit down with you. You had me on your show, so I had to return the favor, but I wanted to have you on anyway. Like I like a lot of the things that have been in your background and that you see, and I'm excited to pull that out into the show. So thank you for joining me for an episode.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for having me.
Give people an overview of who you are and obviously tell us a bit about Cytora as well.
Yeah, so I'm Juan. I'm the COO at Cytora. So my role at Cytora is I lead product and engineering. I lead our customer success teams and our sales teams. Cytora is a digital risk processing SaaS provider. So we are the leading player in enabling commercial insurers specifically transition from manual risk flows that consume a lot of underwriting capacity on manual activities and underwrite kind of out of appetite risks to digital risk flows where underwriters only focus on quotable and decision ready risks. And kind of the 3 kind of areas of business value we drive in our clients are it's an uplift in productivity measured by GWP per FTE in the underwriting teams. Second of all is broker service, so faster turnaround time. And the third one is more consistent and superior risk selection. Before Cytora, I was at Hiscox, where I was the chief operating officer in the UK. And my background before that is in management consulting. I was based in San Francisco.
Well, so we worked at the same firm, but not at the same time, but didn't meet there. But we did meet at Hiscox, where we were both there at the same time. And the things that you were just talking about for Cytora, you were actually living on the carrier side. I am curious, that was your first stint at a carrier, going from working in Silicon Valley to insurance, which is obviously even more dynamic and innovative and everything. You must have had some aha moments, right? Some surprises, some interesting findings, and then maybe some things that proved to be true or worst fears kind of thing. Well, I'm curious about your reaction when you came into the insurance world.
Yeah, I mean, definitely insurance is slightly different than high tech in Silicon Valley, right? It's neither better nor worse, but it's definitely a bit different. I think probably initially I approached it a bit naive and I thought, well, how backwards the whole industry is, etc. And then as I said, that was probably because I was being naive. Then I understood many of what makes insurance different, right? So insurance it was the first time I was exposed to an industry where kind of the cost of goods sold was not known at the point of sale, right? That makes the whole industry very different from any other industry. And then I realized many of the things that I thought were very strange made sense. And some of them were because generally we probably have quite an inefficient industry. So it was more balanced view after I got to know the industry. I mean, just to give you perhaps a couple of examples, right? So some of the things that were very alien to me initially, and then I understood the reason was in Hiscox in the UK, we had a direct-to-consumer channel, right? Where we obviously invested a lot of money in attracting consumers to our portal. Mm-hmm. And then we would say, no, sorry, we don't want to serve you, or we don't want to offer you to over 60-70% of those customers, right? So that was like, oh, like, why would we even do this? And obviously there's a good reason of having an underwriting appetite and being selective with the clients you use, but there's also kind of a second consideration, which is, okay, but they are already there. Like, okay, how could you monetize? How could you serve those clients by offering third-party products to those clients and offer them a better experience? So I think there's always a balance to be of, okay, there are things that make sense and things that we could do better.
Yeah. Well, and ironically, that's part of how Hiscox solved in the US was they're that third party coverage that other carriers may not want to offer lines of business or appetite. So it's interesting. Like that is something I think as an industry we're starting to get smarter about and do more sort of serving.
Exactly. And I think that is a good evolution of the industry. I think there are many other things that just the industry probably has not got right yet, right? So if you just think how the transfer of risk works from the client to the broker, to the insurer, to the reinsurer, I mean, it's difficult to make it more inefficient than it's today, right? So, and I think the whole industry is obviously evolving, and we are all contributing to make that transfer of risk a more streamlined process. But the fact that 40-50% of the premium goes to just operational friction in the change, that is something that is not fair for the customer, right? So I think that is something that it's our responsibility to improve.
Yeah. And it's not fun for us either. That's not where the joy of the business comes from. But I'm curious about when you're in the role of COO, some of the challenges that you faced, once you were firmly planted in it, what were the things that you yourself were focused on or felt like we were struggling with as an industry that you wanted to improve?
Yeah, I mean, as a COO, a lot of my focus was on driving down that expense ratio I just was talking about, right? And obviously there's the quick way of reducing expense ratio, which is getting rid of costs, which ultimately is not very sustainable. And then you've got the probably smarter way of reducing expense ratio, which is driving productivity in your processes, right? Which ultimately reduce the expense ratio. And a lot of the challenges were about all the processes within Hiscox, but also across the value chain being very analog, so not being digital, right? So I would say there were challenges both in designing improvements and then implementing those improvements. And perhaps I touch on or expand on both of them, right? So in terms of designing the evolution of those processes, it was difficult to even just capture data of what was going on, right? So where is the underwriting capacity being deployed, or like where are underwriters spending their time? What type of risks bounce around the organization? How many times? Where are underwriters spending their time, right? And almost shadowing those underwriters was the only way of understanding what was going on in the day-to-day, right? And by the way, I'm talking about Hiscox, but this applies to pretty much every insurer. Now that I work with plenty of insurers, this is not specific to Hiscox. This is across the industry. But even when you understood the challenges, understood the pain points, I said, okay, let's change this. The implementation was challenging too, right? Because there were little tools to be able to control the traffic of work within an insurer, right? Like, how do you then implement those, making sure that the right risks go to the right underwriter, make sure underwriters are working on the most attractive risks first. All those things were actually difficult to implement with such analog processes.
You must see that it's reassuring to know that you weren't alone, and it's also upsetting to know these are still problems, but you're seeing these things from a different vantage point now and the themes going on across carriers. What do you think are some of the main pain points that insurers are struggling with today?
I think probably the major shift in the industry in the last 3-4 years is insurers focused on deploying point solutions. So a better policy admin system or a better whatever system they want to deploy, to being much more focused on improving the end-to-end workflow and really deploying digital workflows end-to-end from the moment a piece of work comes through the door all the way through the moment where that piece of work is executed. I always think about this, make the analogy with the manufacturing world, which is it can feel a bit as two very different industries. But let me explain what I mean about these points in common, right? So if you think about how manufacturing worked, let's say 200 years ago, before the Industrial Revolution, right? You would have factories where every item of work you would need hundreds of people touching that item of work in every step of the manufacturing processes, right? That is how manufacturing of factories worked a few hundred years ago.
Yeah.
And there were two things that changed in the Industrial Revolution, right? So one is the concept of flow, of just items of work flowing through the factory, and the second one is automation. And there were three major breakthroughs that enabled that shift of the Industrial Revolution, right? So one is there were new tools available, so things like iron production processes that you could have machines with metal parts, kind of doing some of the steps in the process. The second thing you had is new fuel. So you had things, like steam power really changed the way energy was used in those factories. And the third thing was automation. So being able through fuel and new tools, being able to automate some of those processes. And we all know the impact of the Industrial Revolution in manufacturing. It was a revolution. It was not an evolution, right? So it drove an order of magnitude higher efficiency in manufacturing. And if you think about it, all of those concepts also apply to insurance, right? So if you think about traditional underwriting processes, our risks come in, every single step in the underwriting process requires an underwriter to having to do something about the risk. Kind of copying the data from the broker submission into some sort of system, pulling manually external data into the system, double keying that data into your rating engine and into your accumulation system, etc. Right? So it feels very similar to some extent to those manufacturing old days, and I think now we've got the same three ingredients as the Industrial Revolution had for manufacturing, but for insurance. So we have new tools, we have AI, and recently Gen AI and large language models. We have new source of fuel in insurance. Obviously, that's data, right? Data being more available, both external data and internal data. And then we've got those two things lead to the ability to start driving some automation. And I think that is what's really enabling. If you think about this analogy of the manufacturing, how an item of work flows through a Amazon warehouse where human intervention is only applied when really necessary. I think that is a similar evolution to what we're doing in insurance as an industry, right? Which is evolving to a model where risks flow through the different entities of the value chain, and human intervention is only applied when and where necessary, and machines can do the lower value activities.
Yeah. I feel like it's a theme we've been talking about for a while, but have not here, but as an industry. But it does feel like there's a different energy around it today, and maybe it is because of different tools, data that sits on the cloud is more accessible and cleaner, maybe, if we've moved it there. AI and Gen AI, there's a number of things that I think are enabling us to move past the idea of we wish we could, or we're trying to do these little things around the edges and RPA and whatever else, to actually having the automated machine instead of having the wheel, that's driven by the stream that we had to seed our mill right next to. It does feel like it's this moment of shift for us, maybe.
No, I definitely agree, right? I think we've got all these breakthroughs are making it real. A lot of the transformation visions, probably many of us in the industry had, or the whole industry had for many years, right? I think now it's becoming possible, right? And I think now it's when we've got the technology, then insurers have a very clear vision of, if you think about what insurers ultimately want to do is, I'm sure there are more priorities, but some top priorities at the CEO level are, okay, how do you drive productivity in underwriting? How do you provide better broker service? And how do you move your underwriters from transacting items of risk to really being more focused on the macro view and spending more time engaging with brokers, right? I think it's fascinating how all the manufacturing concepts apply to insurance, right? Even the concepts like lean, right? So when you think about, again, lean philosophy across different industries, is about, okay, how do you remove unnecessary work?
Yeah.
Right. Which in insurance is, how do you make sure your underwriters are not spending time on an out of appetite submission? Right. That it's not going to result in a quote. Why would you want an underwriter touching that? Right. Or how do you optimize the routing of work within the company? Right. This is about how do you prioritize risks? How do you how can you have a single point of entry for all the risks in the organization, but then internally intelligently route a very vanilla risk to a straight through process channel, a complex risk to a senior underwriter, a more simple risk to a more junior underwriter.
Yeah.
And then it's like, if you think about it, it's like so many analogies, right? It's how do you drive automation, right? So automation in insurance is, how do you automate low value activities, pulling data, avoid rekeying data. And then there's this concept of accelerating the human touch in lean, right? Which is, how can you then, when you do need a human involved, how do you make that process as fast and efficient as process, right? So in the insurance world is, how do you provide the best insights to the underwriters so that they are not starting with 100 pages of risk, but they're starting with an analysis and decision support dashboards to analyze the risk, right?
Yeah, let them come in intelligently. I mean, it's like any customer service call is like when you get bounced around from person to person, you have to restart the story from the beginning each time. That's not the right experience. It's not efficient for the customer or the person on the receiving end of the company. So set your underwriters up to have a better experience as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So I love the manufacturing analogy. I think you are sparking people to think about this, that maybe in a way that they haven't before. But I want to share, it's not just underwriting. I mean, these same things exist in every part of the organization. And obviously you've lived in an underwriting world, but I did a lean review in the claims team. A lot of these same things come up for claims, but what you just talked about, especially, just had this conversation this morning with someone around the threat of AI to everyone's job. It's like, well, hang on a second. I cannot think of a single commercial lines underwriter who has ever said, I have too much time on my plate. I go through everything in my queue and I've got nothing left to do. Is usually they can't quote every piece of business that comes to them. They struggle to figure out which ones to spend the time on. And that's why, they are like you said, you're driving all this business, 60, 70% of it is out of appetite anyway. Well, you only know that if you look at all of it. So how do you figure out what you should spend your time on? And then once you do, how do you make that as efficient and effective as possible? So it's not about replacing people. We're all overtaxed. It's about getting people to the right moments so that they can add what humans add instead of wasting it on the drudgery or the things that go nowhere. So you never even get to the high value items.
Yeah, they definitely. And it's natural and human, right? That when there's change, there's always the fear of what's going to be the impact. And I remember when I was back at the insurer, there was always this fear of if we push too hard the direct channel, how it's gonna impact our broker relationships, and that is totally it's human nature. You obviously need to understand the risk or the impact. Having said that, if these type of kind of AI-powered underwriting workflows, I think it's the first time in insurance where I've seen new technologies really embraced by underwriters. And ultimately, that is the ultimate almost metric of is this something which is positive or not for an underwriter? And when you see the kind of we see this obviously daily with our clients, but I'm sure others will say it with their clients, is the ultimate measure is just talking to an underwriter after you've removed all the busy work that doesn't excite them. You've removed the having to Control C, Control V fields from one system to another. You've enabled them to have a better conversation with a broker. You enable them to spend more time with brokers. That is something that just underwriters really appreciate, and actually the feedback is extremely positive, and in a way that I've never seen before. Right? I think in insurance we're used to having to push technological change against underwriters almost, and I think now is the first time where it's almost the other way around. It's underwriters advocating for, hey, can you get rid of all the low value work I'm doing, and can you help me be successful? Can you help me write more business? Can you help me in my decision making? Right?
I want to ask you about Gen AI in particular, and you mentioned AI, and that maybe that's the right note to end on, because it's happening now and it's still future-ish. But before we do, there's something you've mentioned to me before about 10-click underwriting. And I asked you, I said, is 10-click good or bad? And obviously, like, for anyone who's lived through it, it's like multiples of good. But I'm curious your take on it. And is that a pipe dream? Is it possible? Are there things in play that make it feasible in the foreseeable future? But like, so what is it, and what do you think we need to get there?
Yeah, so 10-click underwriting is not a vision. So nowadays it's a reality. So there are a number of insurers that have a 10-click underwriting, and this is not for like small SME risk. This is for like proper mid-market commercial risks, right? And perhaps I can just run you through like what does 10-click concept looks like, right?
Please.
So think about, so let's take the new business process, right? So you've got submissions coming in from brokers. Most likely it's an email with a number of attachments. So first click is the underwriter receiving that email and just forwarding it to our platform as Cytora, but any risk kind of digital risk processing platform. Then the platform kind of does its magic, so extracts all the information, augments with external data, analyzes the quality of the risk against the underwriting appetite. It creates all the insights for the underwriters. So the next click is literally the underwriter logging into our console, into a workbench, and just looking at the risks already digitized and evaluated, and always prioritized by the attractiveness of each risk. So the second click is clicking on the most attractive risk, on the one best aligned with the appetite and the underwriting strategy. And so we've done 2 clicks so far. So the third click is directly going to the red flags of the risk. So really looking at the dashboard, understanding the profile of the risk, and the rest understanding what the red flags of the risks are. What are the outliers of that risk, right? That is from a risk profile, but similar from a loss history perspective. So that would be the kind of the 4th and 5th click will be red flags and insights from a loss profile, so from a risk profile and from a loss history perspective. Then the 6th click is, okay, now I understand the risk. This is a risk I want to quote. I now decide to move into pricing stage. At that point, kind of all the data is pushed to the rating engine, obviously in the back end through APIs. We've got partnerships with the likes of Hyper Exponential, really fantastic pricing engine, where you can just provide all the data in the background. The underwriter then moves to Hyper Exponential or any other rating engine, analyzes the risk there, inspects the risk in greater detail from a pricing perspective. Can do the peer review if required, and at the end decides what's the quoted rate, and press, and a quote goes out automatically. So that is roughly like what a 10-click underwriting. And again, this is not so much a vision. This is a real integration. This is a real process
right now.
this is the only way you can really achieve the 2-hour or 4-hour quote turnaround time that many of our clients have, right?
Yeah. Well, I for years I've heard about zero question underwriting, and it was always this like, I mean, you at least have to ask like contact details or something. So it was always this like pipe dream that wasn't letter of the law possible, but you could approximate it. So I didn't know what this is. If it was like, I mean, for a lot of lines in this is sort of like mid-market segment, we're talking 100+ questions. I know someone who got it down to 80 and they were very happy with themselves for getting to, but or questions, I should say, clicks. So I didn't know if 10 was like, it's just a magical number we made up because it's significantly lower, but you've actually mapped it out to the actual steps. So it's a real thing, and it's very cool that it's possible. I'm sure there's a lot of underwriters who are wishing that they had that at their disposal. I did want to, end on the AI note. How are you thinking about that? Obviously, it's consuming a lot of conversation, and not just because Sam Altman was pushed back and then today brought back, or last night brought back into OpenAI. So it's been on the front page of a lot of news the past few days. But what's your take on AI and Gen AI for this industry and what it can do, especially given Silicon Valley, carrier COO, and now, on the insurtech side?
Yeah, this is very timely, as you said, right, with all the OpenAI drama we've had over the last few days or week. So I guess a couple of things. One is it is creating a revolution, right, in the industry, and I am seeing the industry becoming almost two speed. So there's a portion of the industry who is embracing it with the right safeguards, and I'll talk about that in a second. But kind of embracing it, understanding that this is the direction of travel, that it can actually enable this industrial revolution for insurance. And there's the kind of the late adopters, right? That are being, I guess, as late adopters, they're just waiting to see what happens, right?
Yep.
And I think I see our responsibility to enable both, right? It's not just to focus on the early adopter, but it's about how do we enable the whole industry to embrace. But I think we are seeing this split at the moment. Hopefully that will be kind of overcome in the next few months. So I guess two considerations. One, in terms of how they're thinking about AI, or specifically Gen AI, right? So one is, how do they get comfortable by using external LLMs? And at the end, obviously, to use the LLMs, often you need to send some risk data to external LLM providers. And I think that there's been a lot of progress in LLM providers like Google. Google is a partner of ours, of creating the right safeguards and the right controls. So like things like none of the data sent to the LLM is neither stored nor used for any training, right? And I think that there's really strict IP controls around that to make sure that there's no IP leakage, which is obviously it's a very valid concern from a carrier perspective, right? So I think there's been a lot of progress in the last 6 months in terms of from this being the Wild West probably a year ago to like really players like Google putting the right controls around IP security, etc., to make sure that there's no that IP leakage. But once that's overcome, I think the use of LLMs is, for the first time, allows insurers to overcome many of the historical challenges in digitizing risk. Perhaps let me give you 3 of them, right? 3 examples, like very specific examples of how LLMs are used, right? So the first one is extraction of data from brokers, from broker communications. Let's imagine a new business broker submission, right? So being able to understand what the broker is asking for in the body of the email, which is by definition a very unstructured format, being able to extract all the information from the proposal forms and statement of values, etc. So that was something that 2 years ago you would have to train hundreds. I mean, you would, well, not hundreds, like thousands. You would have to train a model with thousands of examples to just train the ability to understand a data point from any of those submissions, right? So that is something that now, so in our platform, you can do that in a zero-shot basis, and then can enhance the performance through feedback loops and et cetera, right? So that is something that, again, it was either impossible or extremely time-consuming a year ago, and now, so now it's a reality, right? And this is in production, and many of our clients are using it in production. A second area where LLMs are hugely valuable, again, in a way that wasn't possible a couple of years ago, was on even once you've extracted all that data, is how do you map that to a schema or to a taxonomy that a carrier is able to understand. So the carrier systems are able to understand. So you need to extract, if you take, for example, like a property risk, right? You need to extract, obviously, the property locations, but you also need to extract things like the occupancy of each of those properties. So what is each property used for? And then you need to map those occupancies to the occupancy codes that your rating engine is able to understand, right? So all that mapping, obviously, you cannot do that rules-based, because you would never be able to create all the rules for all the potential ways the broker is going to send that information. And large language models are really performant. I mean, some of our models have over 97% of performance in that inference of data into client mappings. Again, it was a challenge that until now you required a human to look at what the broker had provided and then choose a value in your internal systems, and that can be automated through large language models. And probably a third there, I mean, there are many more, but just to talk about three of them, right? And a third one would be, how do you provide guidance to underwriters on what to do with a given risk, right? So things like, now you can upload your underwriting guidelines alongside with your historical book and a given risk, and then guide the underwriter on how to think about underwriting a risk. You can say, okay, based on your underwriting guidelines, what should you take into consideration when underwriting this risk based on the specifics of this risk? And again, this is something that until now you'd had to do it through training, shadowing, peer reviews, communication to underwriters. So this is how you kind of underwrite this type of risk. And then now, for the first time, this is something that through large language models, you can really guide the underwriter of what to do with a specific risk.
Juan, I was gonna end on this note, but I think actually to pull it back to your kind of bifurcation of like, there's the carriers who get it and are starting to play in this or doing something material, and then there's those who are waiting and seeing. A lot of what you've talked about, if I think back to other talked about major shifts like IoT and telematics, we've been talking about that since the aughts, like 2006 or something. You know, some of the OBD port plugins were first coming out, and it's made a ton of progress, but by and large, auto insurance still isn't predominantly written through telematics. For people who are thinking, well, that's, you know, it's been almost 20 years and that still hasn't caught on, I've got time with this stuff. You're talking about things that 12 months ago really weren't feasible, and already they're very much so. You and I were talking before recording, I wanted to use AI to help with some of the, not transcription, but like summaries of the show. And it's like, yeah, you know, can't quite do it yet. It can't watch the episode and give me a LinkedIn post. And that's very much a yet. And it's probably a few months out, if that. You know, it's like we're in November, late November. It could be by year end, who knows? But certainly I would imagine before year end 2024, that will be like, yeah, why aren't you using that? That's obvious.
Yeah.
So I do get the sense that a lot of what you're talking about is the ability to wait on the sidelines versus the last times people have been able to make those decisions. You don't have the like 5, 10, 15 years to see how things develop with this anymore. Is that your sense of it as well, that you do have to come off the sidelines faster now if you want to stay relevant?
So definitely yes, but I think we are seeing carriers moving faster in a way that we didn't see the industry moving as fast with anything. of the previous potential shifts like IoT, etc. And I think there's one main reason why the industry is moving significantly faster, which is for the first time, there's tangible business benefit, right? So we were talking about IoT, ecosystems, etc. Right? Like those were all things which are very valid theoretically, right? So they're like, from a theoretical point of view, they make sense. But it was difficult to then translate that into, okay, and this is the business impact for your organization. I think what we're seeing with kind of digital risk processing technologies and using Gen AI is today there are carriers that are being able to return a quote to the broker within 2-3 hours of receiving the submission, right? Today we're seeing some of our clients have multiplied by 2 the productivity of their underwriters, so doubled the GWP per FTE. So when I think when you see the actual business impact, it's really difficult to stay on the sideline and say, well, I get it, I could double the productivity of my team. I'm not sure I want to. And I think that is the reason why I think kind of the industry is moving at a pace, or is adopting this technology at a pace that we haven't seen for any other technology, because you can, so the business impact is really tangible.
Yeah, I love that. All right, we will leave it there, but thank you so much for the time. And that I think that leaves people with hope. For people who feel stuck and wish their organizations were moving faster, hopefully it gives them hope. And for people who are ready to make those leaps, knowing that there are ways to have material impact right now that's a great place to be in, instead of feeling trapped as we may have in the past few years. So thank you, Juan, so much for spending the time today.
Again, thanks for inviting me, Brian. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you to Juan for sitting down with me after recording, was saying he's usually on the other side of the microphone. It's nice to get to flip to the guest side sometimes. I definitely hope that he appreciated it. I think it was valuable stuff because he comes from this really interesting perspective of, initially coming from Silicon Valley, consultant's perspective, outsider from insurance, coming into insurance, being at a carrier for a number of years, and then now at an insurtech, serving carriers, working with so many different ones. And as he said, sometimes you learn it wasn't just us who was struggling with this. It's actually things that the industry sees more broadly. And I do love this note that we just ended on. As we come to these moments of what could be profound change in the industry, drivers of that, he talks about the industrial revolution kind of moment for our industry. We do also have a risk aversion to change in this industry, which leads many of us to sit on the sideline. But I love his point that the benefit is actually tangible and provable now, in a way that for some of the other supposed, like drastic changes in the industry, we haven't had that ability to prove it out. And this is different with Gen AI and with the way that and data and so the other pieces are starting to come together. So if you're feeling stuck, maybe this is the thing that lets you feel, hey, maybe my organization won't be stuck because the proof is in the pudding and it's visible. And if you're willing to take the leap, you can do that knowing we can actually get a return on this leap much faster, and that will put us in a much better position than our competitors who are holding back. If you're holding back, maybe this helps pull you off the sidelines and recognize this is not a 15 to 20 year wait and see situation anymore. You won't be able to compete when your competitors are doubling, tripling their productivity, on top of, rate adequacy and reinsurance rates going up and all the other things that we struggle with. There are tools at our disposal that are actually here now, or will be here within a few short months if they're not exactly here today or not quite ready for prime time. And we have to start taking action. So call to action for everybody. I hope that was valuable for you and interesting. Ask yourselves, where does this apply to my business? Who could I get roped into this conversation to help move us forward? Maybe you want to share the show, share this episode or the show more broadly with people. You can always do that. Just send them to future-of-insurance.com. And there's a link for podcasts, or tell them to go to future-of-insurance.com/podcast, or search for the show on whatever major podcast platform or YouTube you want to share it on. All right, I will leave it there. Thank you, everyone.